Today we'll finish this sweater, except that I'm sure you're aware that a cotton sweater isn't truly finished until it's been washed and dried, but we'll do what we can up to that point, and your finished sweater will look like this. If you got the identical gauge to the one I got, which is 3.5 stitches and 5 rows per inch, your garment will finish to 60 inches around and 30 inches long. But it may be bigger than that by the end of today because washing and drying is likely to draw the fabric in a bit. Let's take a close look at the design and clear something up. You may be saying, wait a second, yours has sleeves and you didn't tell me to knit any sleeves. That's right, I didn't, and I didn't knit any either. Here's what happens. Below the neckline, both front and back, we work that center seam. When you put your head between the two strips that we did knit, it pushes them to the side, creating the illusion of sleeves. So let's seam the front and back. These are the two cast on ends. You can tell because I cast on using waste yarn and did not bind off with it. And I have the center fronts aligned. I've already anchored the lower edge stitches together, and we're going to whip stitch the knots together. If you wish to use a different seam, you can, but that's a knot. It's a tight little stitch along the edge. Alternate rows create bars. So we're going to use the knots. There's the first pair. And I'm using a longer piece of yarn than is really convenient because I'd really like to make the entire seam with one length of yarn. And of course, this is a tunic length. So for the first few stitches, it'll be a little bit laborious. Skip the bar, down through the knot, up through the next knot, pull through. It makes a little zigzag sort of, and pull it just tight enough that the fabric lays flush and touches. We don't want to shorten it or pull it in any way. Just get good contact. And go all the way up to the bottom of the neckline. And you will know when you get there because we've already done the neckline finishing. I will work up to that point and show you when I reach it. Here's where the neckline trimming began. So I am nearly there. We'll just continue the seam as we have been. Do the last few knots and then fasten it off. I generally go around the final stitch a couple of times to secure it. That is it. And I just literally stitch through it twice. So that's good and strong. Then go down to the wrong side. Fasten the yarn around an interior stitch. Weave in. And snip off. Here's the finished seam. Here's a view of it on the garment. We just seamed the front from hem to neckline. Now do the same on the back. Now is when the shoulder markers come into play. Fold the garment at the shoulder so that the underarms align. That point is easily spotted because that's where our trim begins and ends, where we did the tuck purl stitch. To use the same seam that was used on the center front and back from hem to underarm on the sides. By the way, one reason I like this seam for heavy cotton yarns is that it doesn't create any extra bulk. It lays perfectly smooth against the body. Our yarn markers have done their job, so now we can simply pull them out and discard them. If you used waste yarn as I did and did not add in a ravel cord, you'll probably need to snip a few places. I'm going to start just pulling, and you can see it gathering up. We'll at least need to snip this in and use a contrasting yarn that contrasts pretty strongly so you have no trouble finding what to snip. Now I will keep pulling. Sometimes this will slide right out in one piece, but if it doesn't, this one did, separates neatly. Here's the other side. I will show you an easy way to get it off if it doesn't slide out neatly in one piece. It's going to depend on the textures of the two yarns you used. Oh, my scissors are slightly magnetized and my yarn needle stuck to them. Make sure that all you have is the waist and snip in multiple places. Usually 4 or 5 across the row will do it. So if this particular time you didn't have any ravel cord handy, you pull out in smaller bits. Right now, I think all of us are trying not to waste things, including yarn. And this one row is wasted, but the remainder of that waste yarn can be rolled up and used again. And a very pretty edge remains. All that remains to do is weave in the ends and, of course, wash and dry the garment. You can either use the latch tool to work in and out of the backs of stitches and seams and pull the yarn tails in and then snip them off, or you can thread each yarn tail into a yarn needle and work the needle through the backs of stitches or the nearest seam and snip off the excess tail after you've woven in a couple of inches. If by now you've fallen in love with this yarn because it really is soft and comfortable, it feels substantial and yet it's not hot. I live in a hot part of the country and I enjoy this in the summer. You may be glad to know that I have some other patterns that employ the same yarn. You already know about this one, a version of what we just did, though it's quite different. The bulky cotton top collection also contains these 3. 1 cardigan, 1 V-neck tank top with special ribbing, and perhaps my favorite, one that has the illusion of a giant cable. I hope your Poor Girl Tunic is a big success and that you find oodles of fun ways to wear it.